Okay. Oops. All right, I think we're ready to start. Well, hi, everybody. Dang, this is a really big room full of people. Thanks for coming to So You or Someone Else Thinks You're a Producer. So I'm curious, before we get started, how many of you here actually are producers? Are people. Welcome.
Ooh.
Excellent. Okay, how many of you are thinking maybe you might want to become a producer? Yay, excellent. Hopefully we won't scare you too much today, so that's a good thing. And how many of you have had production responsibilities thrust upon you against your will? So Indy's in the house. Excellent, okay. Cool, well thanks for that. That's actually gonna help us to kind of form our conversation around who's here. So, by the way, I'm Amy Dallas. I'm gonna be moderating this fine panel of talented producers. And I've actually been a career producer my entire adult life. Currently, I run a studio in Portland, Oregon that does tech consulting for game and film companies. But I actually have seen production from a lot of different sides. I've been a AAA producer. I've been a producer at kind of smaller to medium-sized game companies and an indie producer. And having seen it from all the different angles that I have, I can honestly say there is no one way to be a producer. And it's also the best job you'll ever have, except on days when it's the worst job you'll ever have. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk a little bit about what the producer role is, what it isn't, the good, the bad, and the ugly of the job, and just getting some insights from this amazing bunch of people here. So in a minute, I'm going to ask them all to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about how they started their journey on production. But basically what we're going to do is I'm going to ask them a bunch of questions, and we're going to kind of kick it around and try and keep it really fluid. But we're going to try and see if we have some time for questions at the end. This is like the biggest panel I've been on in a long time, so hopefully we'll have time, but there's a lot of ground to cover here. But if somebody says something and you really, really just want to ask a question that you feel everybody would benefit from, just stick your hand up. We don't have to be too formal. So with that said, I'm going to hand things off to Joe here. Joe,
Yep.
do you want to tell us how you became a producer?
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, I'm the producer at a company called Harmonious. So we started out about 3 years ago as a uni graduate team from Swimmer University. And so I studied to be a programmer, like in a comp sci background. And then when we started the company, somebody kind of needed to start managing the business and production side of things. And it took me pretty much all of the first year of the company running to kind of figure out what that actually meant and how much I actually had to do. And yeah, so I definitely like am this title. Like it kind of just like became a thing that I had to do because it was someone's job that had to get done. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Cool. I probably don't need this. I'm very loud. So my name's Meredith. I'm a producer at a studio called Ultimerse. I actually started out as the marketer when I started with them. And then very similarly, within a couple of months, I was doing a lot of different things that didn't necessarily fall under marketing. Ironically, it was this time last year that I had a conversation with someone in the halls of GCAP. And I was like, I'm doing these things. Are these things I should be doing? And she was like, oh, no, that's all production. And I was like, oh, okay. But those were the parts that I was loving the most. So I went back and kind of had a chat to the team and, yeah, have loved every minute ever since.
I'm Kamina. I don't know if this is loud enough.
Whoa.
Can you hear me at the back? Yeah. Thanks. So I started in QA for Tin Man Games, which was doing kind of the Fighting Fantasy role-playing game books. And I took on a variety of roles, and then I kind of ended up production, but it was a very smooth pipeline. From that, Ken asked me to help out at Mountains as producer and operations manager, and moved into that, and it's really different from Tin Man, so I had kind of like learned a lot of new processes along the way. Yeah.
I'm Jair McBain. I also started in QA and quickly ended up in design because, as most of you probably know, Melbourne studios aren't very big and everyone needs to do a bit of everything. And that was at a company called Twitch that got acquired by Gree, which then shut down. And since then I was working at a studio called YMAC, which was doing an original title that kind of combined esports and let you win money for playing really well. So that was pretty cool. There we built custom hardware and building platforms and built an awesome team. So That's my background. I just got back from traveling the UK for a year because I was burnt out as shit. So here I am, and we'll get into that.
I'm Cass. I'm the assistant producer at a studio called Weta Gameshop. That's a combination or collaboration between Weta Workshop and Magic Leap. We make games for the Magic Leap 1. We just released our first one, Dr. Robot's Invaders. Thank you. I joined the studio as studio coordinator about halfway through my second year of uni, and that was basically an administration role, which is pretty close to production, some people will say. And I'd made it very clear to the studio that I wanted to move into production, so it got to a point where our current producer wanted to go into operations work, so we thought, well, we might as well just switch roles.
Hello, I'm Lisy. I work at a studio called League of Geeks. We made a game called Armello. I went to uni and studied game design, and I have a Facebook memory post saying, I think it was my third year of uni, saying, I want to be a producer when I finish uni. So I really, as soon as I got to university, I knew that's what I wanted to do. And after I finished uni, I moved from Brisbane to Melbourne, and shortly after was very lucky to get a job with League of Geeks as an associate producer and community manager. And that's where I did kind of both roles while we were launching into early access. And then I had a conversation with my boss, Trent, and he kind of said I had to decide because obviously I couldn't do both. So I really love production as much as I enjoyed community management. I chose the production track, and now we have 2 producers in our team and 25 people, and we're about to hire 4 more people. So we'll be hiring lots and lots of people over the next few years. So please email. I also do the recruiting too, which is kind of weird, and we'll talk a lot about that. But yeah, that's me. So
I'd love to hear from you guys what you think a producer is and what you think it isn't.
I'm not your mother.
Amen.
Yeah. Or personal assistant.
Yeah. That's something that I've found a lot is, I mean, it's especially because I came from the studio coordinator position, which was a little bit more personal assistant-y. When I moved to production, I had to set a lot of boundaries within that role, things like I'm not responsible for making sure you get to meetings on time, I'm, not going to go get your lunch, or, I do go get people's lunch sometimes, but, it's, as long as it's not an expectation, it's fine. If I offer, that's okay.
I think a producer is whatever other people don't want to do a lot of the time.
Seriously.
And it's often work that's invisible and underappreciated, but if you're doing it right, no one knows about it, and that's kind of okay, and it's kind of how it should be if you're doing the best work you can do. But really, I think a producer should be someone that lets other people do their best work. And with that, I think you need to be supported to have a support network, because you're performing emotional labor 24/7 as a producer, and you can't leave that at work sometimes. So I would like that to be less a part of the job outside of work hours, and to do that you need support structures. So that's what I'd like it not to be. I'd like it to be more about helping others and letting them do cool stuff, because that's what I care about.
I ask a lot of questions. I also don't have a lot of technical ability, so for me, it's just asking people why they're making the choices they're making, what they're doing, why they think that's the highest priority right now when we discuss something else maybe. I'm also the emotional blackmailer. Just recently, I told my team that if they were going to stay late, I was going to stay late, and I really wanted to go home, so up to them.
Did that work? Nice. Well done. Excellent.
I wouldn't push back on Kamina. That's not. Yeah, I think at its core it is about understanding, and it's understanding your team and their needs and understanding what the goals are, because sometimes there'll be goals that you're aware of that the team has no idea about, but you've still got to help guide them towards that end result. So, but you can't fix everything. I think that's what it's not. You can't come in halfway through a project that's already not quite there and pull everything back or change those things. I think those are structures that you really do need to try and implement as early as possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I guess like for me, production or like the producer role is always, at least for me personally, has always just been a collection of everything that has nothing to do with actually making the game. So it's all like those soft skills, like the hiring or like the project management, the finance, all that sort of stuff.
And you mentioned
Yeah.
yesterday it was like being an umpire, which I thought was a really interesting
Yeah,
point.
so my first job that I did as a teenager was as a soccer referee for like basically 5 to 6 years, and it's only in the last like kind of couple of months where I've really realized that the two roles are like very similar in a lot of ways, because like people only really notice an umpire when they make a bad call, and it's basically their job to facilitate the game in an invisible way, setting the tone by making certain decisions. And yeah, it's like that's kind of almost like exactly what a producer is on the floor.
We had our production meeting just before I came here, and I told the producers in my team that analogy, and they both did the full like sit back in their chair, like minds lost. They were like, because we've been looking for this analogy because that's what we do a lot at Log. We have a pretty structured because we have the luxury of having multiple producers. Like I'm very much the running of the strategy, making sure we're shipping on time, looking at structure and stuff like that. While Woody is more on the ground facilities stuff. But yeah, we've been trying to figure out what's our ethos for production, what are our strategies internally, and that was such a good one. They both were, it was very on point. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, for all the people who are thinking about being a producer, what are the best parts of this job? Like, what attracted you to being a producer?
The people, hands down, getting to form really strong relationships, I think, with the team that you're working with and helping them actually form strong relationships with each other. Often, you know, with any workplace, you get clashes of discipline or approach or even just personality. And I think being able to work with people and find the common ground amongst all of them to get to the results is really, really rewarding.
I'm not
Agreed.
super creative, but I get to help people make something really creative, and I get to like be a part of that process, and I really like that.
Yeah, I think it's about providing opportunity for other people. Like I'm hypercritical of my own creative work, and if it was up to me, I would never put anything out.
Seriously.
But having been in a position to hire people before they finish uni, who are showing incredible promise and like a really complex way of thinking about the work that they do, and a really deep and mature way of thinking about the work that they do, and then watch them take that opportunity that they might not have had otherwise. That's the most rewarding thing I've ever seen. So I'd like to do a lot of that if I can again in the future.
I think that's probably all right. The most rewarding part for me has been, so we just shipped Invaders. That was my first game, and it was. I suppose this is probably for everyone, but that moment of realizing that we'd actually done it. We talked before about coming in partway through a project, which we didn't really do, but we sort of changed production methods and brought in some new producers about a year or so ago, and I was one of them. And you have those moments where you just are like, how are we going to do this? It can't be done. And then you do it. And you have that moment where it's like, all the invisible work, like, all the Jira and planning and sprints and everything.
It actually made a thing.
Yeah. I don't know if this is healthy, but I'm a fixer. So I love fixing broken things and broken people. So like inherently that's why I love my job so much, because I just love fixing things. Like whether it's, a broken build and how are we going to fix it, or we're going to slip a date, so how are we going to fix that, or two people are arguing, how am I going to fix that? Like it's probably unhealthy, right? That's
It's
like
like a hit,
yeah.
right? It's like you solve a problem and you're like, yes.
Yes, it is so much like that. Yeah.
How about you?
You're in the right field for people that need fixing.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. How about you?
I guess I'm in like the rare situation where we're actually hiring a producer at the moment because I don't enjoy doing it.
The truth,
Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah, I think for me it was more I got spread thin between so many different roles. I could never really like delve into production proper. So like I have a mild degree of imposter syndrome, like calling myself a producer, because it's not what I've done a huge amount of.
Yeah, everyone. All of us feel that way.
Yeah, so like, like the people and like actually like, facilitate like the team and keep things running. Because I'm one of the co-founders of the company. I'm like one of the directors and all that sort of stuff. So I get my more satisfaction out of just like keeping the business running, which is why I'm moving into a business role, because that's where I get more validation out of.
That totally makes sense.
If you
So-
can't hear us at the back, can you just like raise your hand every time we dip in and out?
Yeah, just
We're all pretty
Oh, yeah,
give us
if-
a wave.
Yeah, if we're not loud enough, just let us know. So Cass brought up a really interesting point about the celebration of success. How do you all celebrate successes with your team? I saw some of you have stickers up here, so I'm wondering, like, ooh, it's like props, prop comedy. So, yeah, tell us how you do that. So that's really important.
I mean, for us, it's been really great since we brought in our senior producer and our 2 other producers, that we celebrate our successes within that group. Because, you know, again, we were talking about invisible work before. So, for example, at our studio every Friday night we do Awesomeness Review, where people can put in cool things that they've done into a folder, you know, cool assets, things like that. And we all, you know...
Cool spreadsheets? You put in cool spreadsheets?
No, well, that's what I was going to say, is that I don't want to put my spreadsheets in, no matter how colourful and amazing they are and how well formatted, but I'm like... but I'm always like...
I love that got the room. Like, this is the audience.
Yeah.
But, you know, I'm like, well, no one wants to see that. They want to see, like, the cool assets we've made. So for a while I was kind of sad about that, because I was like, you know, I want to celebrate what I've done. But the production team that we have is really good about recognising each other's successes. And we're lucky that we have management as well that pays a lot of attention to what production does. I started doing, I cannot remember what the book was, but it was production techniques, and they suggested a thing called notes of encouragement, which was, you know, where you write little notes and put it on people's desks. So I started staying late and doing that. So people would come in the morning and they'd have like nice...
We have yuck stickers that we put on each other's desks for someone that's saying something gross.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it's the opposite. Yeah, Trent has 3 on his desk as well.
So how did people react when they came in and they saw the note that you stayed late to
Loved
write for them?
it. I mean, I tried to do it for, you know, everyone in the company, but I especially did it for the production team and the QA team because, you know, we work quite closely together, but we're 2 teams that sort of don't get noticed all the time. And everyone was so happy. And then they started leaving notes on my desk. And I was like, I hope people don't think I'm doing this just for validation.
Oh, that's
but
excellent.
it was nice. Like, a lot of people had like said, they were like, you know, it's nice to be recognized for these things.
And how was that for you? Since so often as producers, if we're doing our job well, we're kind of invisible. That's one of the hardest parts of the job, I think. So were you like welling up and...
A little bit. It's like that classic thing where you're at your desk and you got like one single tear just down your face and you're like, it's all right, just be cool. And
Nice. How about the rest of you? How do you celebrate?
We celebrate. So we actually, we have demo days, which is similar to those Awesomeness Reviews, but we actually, I make them look at the spreadsheets. So we actually make sure the production team share what they've been working on as well.
How do you do that?
So I, for example, the last one I did is I showed them a Gmail add-on that I installed on our careers add-on, so email. So I actually went through and showed them, and they're asking questions because I was like, this is our recruitment process. This is how I've filtered all of the applicants and everything like that. And they were asking questions and they were genuinely interested in it, which I thought I just made them. So that was cool. We also have, we do run Agile and Kanban at our work. So obviously we have our development teams that run Kanban, but we made sure that our publishing teams, that includes finance, PR, and community management, we have our own Kanban board as well. And we celebrate things that get across into the done pile. So we do a little like round of applause when we actually ship something, because our tasks move quite slowly. So when we finish something, we actually celebrate that just in our daily stand-ups, which is quite nice.
And we actually went into their office yesterday, and their Kanban boards are hardcore, man.
They're our pride
impressive. Okay, how about the rest of you?
We do something similar to kind of shouting out each other's work. So usually on a Friday, we'll get together and try and have some time where we literally go around one by one and everyone has to say something they worked on that week that they're proud of,
Nice.
including myself. And it doesn't matter, everyone in the team has to do it, and kind of call out, you know, something that they are really happy that they achieved or did. And then also has to shout out someone else on the team. So it kind of encourages people to be a little bit more aware of what other people in the team are doing. And also because they know that's coming. And it creates this really nice camaraderie because it's like, you did something really great this week and then I also achieved this thing, and everyone gets to kind of pat each other on the back and feel good about it. Along with, because, you know, when you're in development, there are weeks and weeks where you may not necessarily feel like you're getting anywhere. So having those moments where you can drill it down to really little bits and pieces can really help.
These are all really great
talking
ideas.
about like the production process as well helps your team see that you are doing work, and like they have a better idea of that process. So when you get to the end of it, it's like, yay, I did the thing, and they know what you have achieved.
Yeah.
But yeah, we have unicorn stickers. For, it's like
We also use
so
stickers are great.
we'll decide like in the stand-up there are certain tasks that I'll like be like, oh, is that like sticker worthy? And it's just a recognition of the effort that goes into a task. And my team gave me one the other week, and I was like super proud that they like did that, and happy because I noticed.
I've probably come at it from another angle. Like the studios I've worked at haven't had HR, they haven't had management support that like actually knows what's going on day to day. So in my case, I think, in my case, like our studio grew from like one person to nearly 50 people in the space of a year and a half, and I was the only producer. And so that meant that I didn't have the time to spend doing these things, and that's very frustrating as a producer because you can see it, you know it should be your job. But if a company doesn't want to spend actual money and actual time on putting structures in place, something else will form in that void, and that is one of the worst things that can happen to your company. And it's hard to come out of that once those people are there and they've existed in that space where all that history is. So if you're worried about it, get on it on top of everything else. It's probably the most important thing apart from just paying your staff and making sure that they're meeting their basic needs. So,
Yeah, that's really good advice.
But to combat that, so I didn't have the resources and time to do that. But what I would do is have really personal one-on-one conversations with people outside of work hours, or let them know I'm there to support them. And you can't do that for 50 people. And that burnout I'm alluding to, that's where that comes from. So make sure that you have this conversation with your management and your CEO or anyone, even other producers like we were talking about yesterday. The best way to combat this stuff is to, even if it's not within the company you work in, just talk to someone else who gets it. So,
Yeah, our prep for this meeting was like a giant producer support group. So. How about you? What do you think? How do you guys celebrate at Harmonious?
So ours is pretty ad hoc. So it's more like if somebody does something, we like call it out and stuff like that. We're getting better at adhering more to like a sprint-based agile process, and like with that having like demo days and stuff like that where people get to show off what they've been working on. But on top of that, we have like one-on-ones where like I'll sit down with another team member and like individually call out what they've done really well in the last quarter. But yeah, ours is definitely, I would describe it as ad hoc.
Fair enough. Your team's in the front row, and I can tell they're totally like ready to needle you right now. So the issue of kind of emotional labor has come up a few times already, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. Like you're talking about the emotional labor of your job is what sent you off to the UK for a year. I'd love to hear from all of you a little bit about that. Talk about your experience with the emotional labor that you have to do every day, because that is a really big part of the job.
It's exhausting. It is really, really hard and exhausting. It is because you are constantly going to be that person that's trying, like I said, fixing other people's problems and fixing people's issues that they're having. You will constantly be faced with this emotional labor because you are at the end of the day probably potentially the person either blocking them or stopping them from doing what they want to do, or even just being that, like Jay was saying, a lot of these companies, we don't have HR, and you usually come into that position as well. So a lot of my role is actually working on complicated HR issues at work, and then because you're stopping to do this, you obviously have to put something else down and not have to work on another task, which then someone will see that you're not doing that and ask why you're not doing this. And then I personally take a lot of this stuff very personally, and it's something that I myself have been trying to work on a lot. Because as soon as someone says, oh, production's not handling this, like I'm like, that means they're thinking that I'm not doing a good job. So I take things very, very personally at my job, and it's something that I continuously have to figure out how to deal with better. One thing I've been trying to do, and I've been very fortunate, my work have helped me by giving me mentorship through, I'm working with a communications mentor. So they're like a neuro communications expert, and they're basically like just helping me break down all these layers of communication. Like when someone says this, they don't mean you're doing a shit job, they mean this. And it's been really, really helpful for me to because every day I feel like I come home and I'm just spent, as I say. Like I just come back and I just am like a jellyfish because I have lost every ounce of energy from myself. But it's getting better because I'm working on communication a bit more. It all comes down to communication styles, I think.
So actually, that's why I don't have children, because I couldn't be a producer and a mother. That's too much mothering and emotional work all the time. So
it's you don't think about it. You don't think about it at all. Like I watched that movie Grandma's Boy, and I didn't think she did any emotional labor. So I was like, that was my basis for wanting to be a producer. If anyone hasn't seen that movie, it's very, very lame and very funny. But yeah, it's good. It's about how good QA is. So Yeah.
Cool. How about you, Cass?
I think one of the, everything Lisy said was amazing and very true to my experience as well. The other thing is, and maybe this is just something that I'm getting because I'm, relatively new to the industry, but it feels like there's a lot of pressure, like, as production, like, to make the game come out on time, right? Like, because, your job is scheduling everything. So you're kind of sitting there, if things aren't going well with it, Wayne, you're like, this game's not going to come out on time, and it's going to be because of what we've done. I mean, I'm very lucky being an assistant producer because, I do have the safety net of our 2 other producers and our senior producer who, can guide me, and they take a lot of that responsibility on, so there's not so much pressure on me, which is really helpful. But the other way that I like to deal with it is to hide in the toilet and play Candy Crush.
Every producer alive has hidden in the toilet at one point. That is a thing.
Yeah,
that
the
actually
toilet
happens.
is the perfect place because no one can find you there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that a threat? That sounded like a threat.
It's accurate.
Cass told a story yesterday about how her bathroom has like timers on the lights and how sometimes she'd sit there long enough the lights would go out. And like, that is the saddest image ever. Sitting on the toilet playing Candy Crush until the lights go out.
The
Like
glow.
that is being a
Glow.
producer just encapsulated perfectly.
Then there's the pressure of like, then you have to leave because the lights won't come on until you like leave the room. And then I'm always worried someone's going to come in and find me just sitting there.
That would be awkward indeed. How about you, Jair?
Well, I couldn't hide in the toilet because our studio had 1 toilet.
That-
For
that
50
would-
people?
Pretty much. Well, we had 2 eventually. Hey, I didn't run the studio. I'm not really sure like how to talk about emotional labor. Yeah, I'm still figuring it out, and it's been a long time. So,
I guess what are the parts of the job that involve emotional labor? Like, what does this mean? How does this manifest in your daily activities?
I think necessarily, like, you're working with people, so you can't treat them as if they're systems. Like, you can't do one thing and it will work for everyone. Which means that there is no time in your day in which you can not perform emotional labor, which, is very tiring, and I think you need a support network. I'm just going to keep going back to that. Like, the support network is key, and if you don't have one, you need to be aware of how long you can last like that.
Well, I guess for people who haven't been, I think what I'm trying to get to is for people who haven't been a producer and they're thinking this might be a role that they're interested in, they might be going, God, this job sounds terrible. What do you mean emotional labor?
But because of that emotional labor, and because it is hard, when it works and it pays off, it's the best feeling in the world.
Yeah.
So, there's the 2 sides to it.
But I guess what I'm trying to get to is what are the daily kind of emotional labors you have to keep people's spirits high or to temper people's angry outbursts or whatever like that? I think that's what I'm interested in hearing.
I think for me, there's a few different things. Has anyone seen the web of communications? There's like a algorithm that if you have, the more people you have, the more complex the web gets. So there's that. So for example, in a team of 14, you have 91 lines of communication. As a producer, you have to understand where all those lines are going to overlap, who is talking to who can talk to each other. So for example, with an interdisciplinary team, programmers and artists, how are they going to communicate and where are they potentially going to run into discourse? No, is that the right word? No, like Discord, run into Discord. So where are they going to... So I have to be able to constantly predict. I can never wear headphones at work because I'm constantly listening for those areas that I can see 2 cars about to hit each other. So for example, if I hear one programmer getting frustrated with a problem they're facing and someone else coming over to ask them for more work, I need to be able to predict that's going to happen and stop that from happening because that's going to make that person more stressed. And therefore that person being more stressed will do less work and have not a good time at work. So basically I'm constantly on high alert for these interactions on a day-to-day basis. I'm also the bearer of bad news. So I'm the person that has to go, cool, we only have 2 weeks left and we're not going to make this date. I have to then figure out a way of asking people, what could we do to make this happen without getting them stressed out? And I have to know how to talk to them and be like, okay, cool, I'm going to be talking to this person, so therefore I have to come in with this approach in order to get the right information out of them. Some people might call that manipulation, but I call that good production.
Diplomacy.
So it's diplomacy. So knowing how to talk to someone and knowing how to... Because if you talk to... I did this for a long time. You talk the same way to every person, you're going to get you're going to completely run into brick walls. You're going to get some be successful, some not. So, yeah, it's a lot of that day-to-day, like, understanding who you're talking to. It's like that whole, like, trait system in The Sims, like, knowing exactly, like, what trait system you're going to be going up against. That's probably,
exactly.
I think one area in particular that's relevant to games is work is iterative, and it necessarily is iterative. And I think a lot of people, when they come into games, be it an artist or a programmer, trying to reconcile the fact that your work is disposable and has to be is incredibly emotional experience. And generally, the longer you've been in the industry, the thicker skin you develop, or the more reason you develop to understand why that's happening. So one area where I performed a lot of emotional labor was helping junior artists figure out why are we just throwing away your work, or why are we iterating and progressing from here to here and leaving what you did, which is great, behind.
Interesting. Yeah,
one area.
absolutely.
And I think often when you're trying to predict all these scenarios, and then you add on top of that people bringing scenarios to you, when you've built relationships with your team, not only are you like, you can hear a car crash about to happen there, and then someone's at your desk already like, hey, can I talk to you about a thing? And that's great. You want that. You want your team to feel that they can come to you. But, you know, like, your day is never what you expect it to be. Like, you get in the morning and you're like, I know exactly what's happening today because you're a producer and you've planned your life out for that 8 hours or whatever. And then you get like 30 minutes in and you're like, cool, that's gone. So being able to be adaptive to that and to actually produce yourself a lot of the time and work out where you have to shift your time. But doing that with emotional labor is almost impossible to do because you only have so much, like just like you have time in a day. But when it comes to actually emotionally engaging with people, if you know that someone's off and then you know that someone else is going to have a conversation with them later that's going to make them feel even worse, and it's, okay, well, how do I mitigate that now? How do I mitigate it later? How do I mitigate it for tomorrow, for next week, on top of doing that with, and again, once those webs get bigger, it gets more and more complex and takes up more and more time. So it's never ending.
Yeah, it is indeed.
I have a headache now.
I think like it can be quite hard to switch off as a producer too.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
A lot of people find this, like, you know, I'm 2,000 kilometers away from my studio right now, and I'm like, all I can think about is the messages that I probably have on my phone right now
Same.
from my team.
I'm farther away than that, and I'm thinking exactly the same.
Like I sort of, you know, I said to everyone, you know, I'm going to GCAP. And I mean, you know, not to be self-deprecating, but I'm an assistant producer. There's other people that they can go to for things, but I'm still like, oh, you know, message me if you need anything. Like, why am I doing that? They're fine.
Yeah. Interesting. Kamina and Joe, do you have anything to add to emotional labor?
Yeah, I guess so. For me, it's one of the advantages at Harmonious is because we all started out at university together. We actually all have the benefit of being friends. So a lot of the communication has like kind of been pretty easy from day one. So a lot of my emotional labor is dealing with external entities because we do a lot of contract work, and so that's dealing with the clients, managing their expectations, filtering what information you get from them and what you want to distribute back to the team. Because often if the client is stressed, you don't want the team to feel that stress as well.
Absolutely.
So you have to act as this buffer, trying to work out what information is relevant to everyone and how much do you need to give them to make them allow them to do their job, but without overloading them with what the client wants as well. Yeah, particularly in the last little while, that's definitely been the main thing for me.
That is a really good point.
So for emotional labor as a producer, I think it kind of takes that next step from being in the service industries of having your own emotions to deal with someone else's, in that we are constantly trying to keep everyone in this very optimal state of happiness. And it's like, always put yourself down, like your own emotions aside so you can deal with these problems. But it's even like remembering when people's birthdays are and how they like to celebrate that is something I have. And it's like, I've got a little document of like things about everyone and what treats they like when their birthdays are. Yeah, I know, it's actually really
I
creepy.
love it.
Yeah, we do that. Yeah.
And then I have photos of them at home.
Yeah, I've told the team about it. But it's just like,
So do they actually come and look at it and go, actually, I don't like these candies, I like these
I
candies
haven't
instead?
shared it.
Oh,
I just
okay, all right.
told
They
them.
know.
All right, nice.
It's like Stardew Valley, like give them the right present.
But yeah, it's like, I will also pick up stuff from not having my headphones in. I've usually just got one in so I can concentrate on work, but I will keep an ear out for any conversation because
I think they can't hear you. Somebody's
Yep.
This is going to sound like I'm budging with this a lot. So I'm a game producer. I've done it for 23 years, and I looked after 130 artists at the Santa Monica studio.
Never heard of it.
What I'm saying is, as far as the emotional work, that's what my job was. So for 2 years, I just looked after the emotional well-being of 130 artists. And the key thing was to distill that. It was to have a very, very high level of empathy for everyone, so you understand their position when they come to you. You don't take it from your position. You understand you stand in their shoes. And you say, why are they bringing this to me now? So you absolutely understand why they're in the room crying at you. But in the same sense, you also have a fear of failure. The fear of failure drives you to solve it and get the project done. So you have the two things fighting against each other the whole time. You want to absolutely look out for the person, but you need to move it forward. And so those two things fight all the time. And I just wanted to bring that up because that's the thing that I did a lot of. And that sounds like we've got to get something.
We should go get a beer. Let's go get a beer after this.
Empathy is such an exhausting emotion, right? It's such a hard place to be in where it's such an important part of your job, but it's also the most exhausting part.
And we got another question here.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, because emotional work seems to be such a big part of it. Why do you think is it that companies just don't hire therapists instead?
Great question.
question.
We've been talking about that at my studio. I know other studios have therapists that you can book in with. They have them on retainer, so they can just go in for sessions. It's a very good point. That's why we're looking at actually bringing this communications mentor in to work with our whole team as well, because we want to teach other people how to communicate better as well. I think that kind of stuff is super important. There's a thing called EAP, Employment Assistant Programs, that you can get as well. So you can actually have them. They're a bit cheaper than having a therapist, but they're just a number you can call, and you can speak to someone about that to get advice on work-related issues. But yeah, it is very much something. I think everyone in games are inherently just an emotional industry, so I think everyone should be getting therapy.
I also don't deal with deeper psychological issues. It's just very light, keep the team happy. If there's something I can't deal with, then it's very much, if I feel something, I'll be like, therapy, I can't help you with this. I'm not a psychologist, I'm not trained, I can't help. I'll probably do damage.
I think the reason a lot of studios don't invest in this kind of support network or production person or psychologist more is because a lot of places just think product is the first and foremost thing they should be thinking about, and it should probably be if you want revenue coming in, but you're not going to make a good product if the people don't have this support network. And there's plenty of statistics, I'm not going to go into them now, but out there to tell you how much more likely your studio is to make a good product that is viable in the market with this kind of support network. So that's also something to think about.
Being a psychologically safe workplace for people to bring up issues, because it's better to catch them early than for people not to say anything.
What is that? Is that the...
Am I touching something? Maybe I'm touching something. Cool. Any more questions?
This is a very heavy session.
Yeah, this is very heavy.
Maybe to segue into product, as you were saying there, I'm quite curious. You guys talked a lot about the emotional journey, the project management aspect of it, and coordination. But you haven't touched on product definition, scoping. So, as producers, do you play a role in that?
Yeah.
Or is that just really PM type of?
We don't. I don't think anyone has. Does anyone have product managers on their teams?
I do.
Yeah.
Eventually.
Yeah, I don't. We don't. So yeah, for us, we have our director team. So we have a creative director, design director, and a game director, and then under that sits production. So we work very closely with those directors to basically take their vision and scope it all out. So we work on all the milestones, all of the planning sessions, figuring out what the best way to iterate is as well. So we do things like we do 6-week sprints with reviews in between and stuff like that. So production team runs all that stuff. We don't do anything creatively. Like we don't try and interject with creative decisions. Obviously we're indie studios, so sometimes these things overlap, but definitely we're just there to facilitate what the directors want to happen, and then figure out if it's actually possible, and then go back to them with a few options. I always like to go back with at least 2 solutions. I don't want to make the decision. I want to put that back on the client. In this case, it's the directors. So that's definitely what I try and do within my day-to-day work. So we're actually in the process of doing a big sprint at the moment for figuring out a new thing that we're working on. So that's definitely something that we're doing a lot of at the moment. So facilitating all that stuff, yeah.
There's a question back there in the corner.
You mentioned that you had to be very predictive of people you're working with, and obviously that's very emotional. How have you found ways to bounce back when things go wrong with the way you create how people interact, or you might miss something that wasn't serious? How do you treat it when things go wrong?
I have a weekly post-mortem doc that I do for myself and decisions I've made, and it also includes actions that I want to take in the future. There's no point in beating yourself up over something. You're not going to change anything that way. Yeah. And chocolate, lots of chocolate.
Yeah, yeah. We have the same thing. We have a production Slack channel, and we go, okay, that didn't work. How could we have done that better? And then we just discuss that and debrief it. I'm fortunate to have multiple people to talk to. So yeah, we go through that. Okay, next time we should do this better. And then if we have any outcomes, we make sure we communicate it to those people as well. So like acknowledge the fact that we may have dropped the ball. Like, hey, we dropped the ball in this situation. This is something that we're doing to improve it. This is something we haven't done. We've only started doing in the last 6 months to 1 year. We've been really bad at that in the past because we've been very much like just running towards the goal line, but now we're trying to reflect a bit more, which has been really a lot more, I think, beneficial for the whole team.
There's a question right there.
So I have like a twofold question. So one thing that was mentioned before was the voids that can sort of be filled if there isn't somebody in this role in a dedicated position. In a growing company, something that I've found is kind of being brought in to do production triage. And so I have some questions about how you guys manage that. And also what you do if your team is blocked by something above you or above them, how you try and resolve those issues.
I think transparency is always really important when it comes to blockers. If there are things that you're going to have to communicate to your team and things that you can't, and being delicate in the way that you handle those situations is really, really important, and as diplomatic and fair as you can be. I think in those instances, if everything is laid out in terms of how you've planned your scope and how you're approaching your problems, if you've given the framework and it's really clear that there's something happening, most teams will work out where the issue is coming from or that there is an issue at all. And at that point, all you can do is try and re-resource into your best plan of attack to try and keep things moving forward and keep people happy. So that's how I would speak to that, I think.
So we've got a couple minutes left, and one area that I wanted to touch on, especially for people who are not yet producers and maybe considering it, was related to a conversation we had yesterday about the backgrounds you all brought into your production, like Joe being a referee, weirdly was incredibly useful to him. So I wanted to hear you guys talk about that again, because I thought that was actually really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I worked at Apple for a little over 2 years. Doing technical appointments. So I was seeing between 20 to 40 people every day, and they're usually not stoked to be there. So you immediately have to, and you've only got 10 minutes with each of them, so you immediately need to work out what their problem is, what their actual problem is, because 90% of the time, it's not the fact that the thing is broken. It's the fact that this is the 5th time they've come in, or it's the fact that it's taking time away from their work or their kids or whatever else.
Emotional labor.
Emotional labor, exactly. And then actually working out what you can do and what the constraints you have are. If someone comes in with a device that's 1,000 years old and it's like, we literally don't have any of these, how do you find the way to actually make them walk out feeling cared for and also feeling like they have a solution? So yeah, it was problem solving on crack, essentially.
Yeah.
And that I never realized how much that framed not only the interpersonal relationships that I make with team members, but also just the problem solving in general and in gaining a really quick understanding of what a person actually needs in a moment. And I don't think I would be anywhere near as comfortable doing that if I hadn't had that like trial by fire experience.
Interesting. Now, Cass, you talked about being in retail.
Yeah, before I went to uni to study games, I had worked in retail for maybe 7 years or so. And it's really interesting because, anyone who has worked in retail will say the same thing. But when you're working in retail, it's a nightmare, right? It's the worst thing of all time. But I look back on it now and to borrow Meredith's phrase, I don't think I would be as comfortable in production as I am if I hadn't had that 7 years in retail, because it teaches you so many, I guess, soft skills and things that, like communication. I worked in retail management a lot, so managing a team of people, and also things like, how to not take things personally, because, again, as anyone who's worked in retail know, people will come in and they will yell at you, and it's frustrating, but you learn to just kind of tune it out. And I mean, in production, obviously, you can't tune it out, because obviously you have to do something about it, but it does teach you how to not then take that on, and take it personally.
I never worked in retail, so that's probably why I take everything so personally. I worked in the finance industry for 8 years. So I worked at Suncorp up in Queensland, and the last 3 years of that, I was an executive assistant. So I actually was a personal assistant to a management team that made really, really fun insurance software. So that was cool. But it was like, there was a 200-person dev team. So at the time, I was like, this is just a job that pays the bills. But I was actually learning, obviously, about Agile. I was learning about management. I was in all the strategy meetings. So I inherently learned so much stuff around how to run big teams and corporations. And it actually meant when I went to the games world, I really struggled at the beginning, because I'm like, what do you mean you don't have all of these things, and you don't have meetings, and you don't have I was very, very structured when I came to log, but it ended up bringing a lot of information, and now we're using a lot of that stuff, because obviously now we have to be structured as we're growing. It was a lot of skills that I could transfer across.
I probably had a weird way to come at it. I taught parkour and free running for years and years.
What?
And people who do it will get it, but basically in parkour you're creating problems for yourself to solve.
Like broken nose and like, yeah.
Like in games, I think something we don't acknowledge enough is we created the problem of making the game for ourselves. Unlike making a productivity software or a health application or something, there is no problem to solve. You have to make the issue, and I think necessarily that means that you have to think about it really deeply and why you created that problem. And this discipline in parkour is known as train to be useful, or work to be useful. And I think the biggest thing I took away from that into games is if you're creating a problem, try and make it a useful problem to solve, and try and make the way that you solve it a useful way of applying your skills that you're using to solve that problem. So, yeah.
That is fascinating. That did not come up yesterday,
Yeah.
so I'm glad I asked. How about you, Kamina?
So I also came from a retail and call center background, and I remember reading How to Win Friends and Influence People, and there's this chapter of like 6 ways to instantly make people like you, and at the end of it I had to put it down and have a little existential crisis, because everything in there I'd done, and I picked it up from being in retail. And it was just like, it's just like things like smile at people, but I was just like, oh.
I don't work in
Am I
retail.
terribly manipulative person?
Smile at people.
Yeah, soft skills.
How about you, Joe? I know you were a referee. Anything else you've done that made you?
I was a soccer coach for a while as well. Like, so again, it's like managing people. So yeah.
And angry parents as well.
I mean, that was the big thing with reffing, because you're a 14-year-old kid getting yelled at by a bunch of 40-year-old dads and mums. And so yeah, you have to develop a thick skin pretty quickly. And yeah, you just have to I think one of the most important things I learned from that was you make a bad call and you just have to bounce back, because everyone cares in the moment, but the game keeps going and you can't dwell on it, because otherwise you're just going to make more and more bad calls. So I think that was one of the main things I took away from that. Also, yeah, just having a thick skin. Because, like when you're getting up at 8 o'clock in the morning to get yelled at by people. Yeah.
Are you talking about work? Wait.
So we have time for maybe one more question, because we've literally got like a minute left.
But we'll
All
be
right,
outside.
You had your hand
And
up
on
first.
Twitter.
How do you identify whether or not someone is not ready to be a producer?
That is a great question.
1 minute.
I'm just going to say 2 words: emotional intelligence.
Maturity as well, and it's the same thing, basically.
If they're not willing to learn aggressively.
Yeah.
That stuff doesn't necessarily have to come with age. Like, we were all talking yesterday about what experiences have made us not emotionally intelligent isn't the right word, but like to have empathy for people. Like, I think you have to have experienced a certain set of experiences to build true empathy, and usually that's not necessarily a positive experience. So I think a lot of us maybe have faced like interesting challenges that some other people haven't, or we've dealt with that in a way that lets us take that experience forward in a positive light. And I think that's common in everyone I see up here. Like, yeah, everyone's a really positive person and spins a challenging thing in a positive light eventually.
Absolutely.
I think for me, it would also just be like they have to have an understanding of their own ego. Because production is
Yes.
a role where everything that you do is intangible, and if you're trying to get out of life validation through like the things you create, like it's probably not the role for you yet until you learn to deal with that. That was something that took me a while. So like that would be one thing.
Have to be patient.
Yeah.
Someone isn't. I mean, you know, I found in production, you know, it can take a little while to see the results of what you're doing. So yeah, you can't be impatient.
Yeah. As much as we would like to be on many, many occasions. So I think we're at time. So everybody give it up for these amazing producers.